This is Focus Saskatchewan. Here's your host, Blake Law.
Good evening and welcome to our 200th episode of Focus Saskatchewan. For 6 seasons, we've crisscrossed the province, and tonight we're celebrating by looking back at some of the more prominent stories that received praise on the national stage. So with no more time to waste, here's former Focus Saskatchewan host Raquel Fletcher with our 2013 RTDNA short feature winner, Restored Memories.
I'll probably cry. I don't know. So, yeah.
This is an emotional time.
Yeah. I'm just emotional. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what's on them.
Nicole Westerman has reason to feel nervous and emotional after finding these hidden away for more than a decade.
I've had them sort of collecting in a bag, I don't know, for the last 11 years, because I know I don't have any baby pictures of my youngest. I'm wondering what's on them. And yeah, pretty much what's on them, and is there anything that I've forgotten about that might be on them, that's something different?
She's just one of many clients who seek out Greg Miller and his team in Indian Head.
About 125 rolls of film every week.
Film Rescue International processes old film, sometimes lost, sometimes forgotten, from around the world. They often have moments like this.
Here's a few of your pictures, and it's a lot more coming, but there's 4 pictures for you.
Oh my. Oh wow. Those are really good. Yeah.
Miller used to have a similar business in Toronto, but in 1999 he moved to Saskatchewan for the small town life and to be closer to family.
We're just getting little dribs and drabs of work in.
But his talent and expertise were soon in high demand.
The one day I was in Regina, and I think I was at the Bay at the time, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Kodak Rochester, and they said, well, do you do this kind of work? And I said, yeah, that's what we do here. And it was the next hour, the phone was ringing off the hook, and business increased about 2,000% overnight.
They now have an office in Europe. Turns out there are very few people who specialize in processing old film.
Film has an expiry date on it that's usually about 2 to 3 years after it was manufactured. First do the safest thing, which is processing it into a black and white negative. Then we take a security scan, and then after that's done, we do what's called film acceleration, which is basically an additional chemical process that creates a color negative.
In their database, they have nearly 500 different types of film they've developed over the years, using about a dozen different processes.
It's not 1 hour photo. There's no one else taking it to this extent at all, any place on Earth. Nudes in Vietnam are very common here. I don't know why Vietnam specifically, but we get every cycle we have Vietnam pictures. We do get some nudes, and it's because somebody in the 1940s, 50s, 60s was having fun with their cameras and took some pictures, and then they realized, well, I can't take this into my local drugstore to have processed.
Then there are photos like these.
Those are pictures taken in the 90s of just around street photographer in New York City, outstanding photographer, just New York City before it was cleaned up, and just it's pretty down and dirty.
Miller's team has seen it all, but not every captured moment is awe-inspiring.
We had stuff that ended up going to the War Crimes Office in Ottawa. It was stuff that came in from the United States, again, Vietnam stuff, horrific stuff.
Yeah.
Fortunately, most of what they develop are good memories.
My grandmother's in the background, which I was close with, and she's passed away.
It's like the last new glimpse you're going to have of somebody. We're the first people who get to see these pictures. You know, they've got the camera out, they've posed for the picture, and then for whatever reason, we don't know why, the film gets put away.
She loved to sit in the sink. And that was that. I lived at my grandma's house there for a while. So they're amazing, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next on the 200th episode of Focus Saskatchewan, some creative video sheds light on our province's dedicated comic culture.
You're watching Focus Saskatchewan.
Welcome back. Our 200th episode trip down memory lane takes us back 4 years ago to when former host Tom Vernon dove into Saskatchewan's comic culture. This piece won an award for creative use of video, and it won't take you long to see why.
In the world of comics, big stories and big cities dominate. There's Gotham and New York.
I'm Spider-Man.
But Saskatchewan is there too, in the Marvel universe. This is Regina, a city destroyed by a villain's biological bomb, now a site with the power to transform even the Avengers. It was an outsider's glimpse at a province with a thriving comic community. Within our borders, there are those that see our world a bit differently, not just reading these stories, but writing and drawing their own. Every week, new stories arrive on the shelves of shops like Comic Readers in Regina. Titles most would recognize, and a growing number of ones that might not feel so familiar. It's an evolution that's been happening for decades, one that is turning the image of comic culture.
10, 15 years ago, if you read comics, you didn't really talk about it unless you knew people that read comics. Now I find it's far more, I'll use the term, acceptable to be reading comics.
Chad Boudreau's introduction into comic culture was like most. He started with superheroes, but was then introduced to more challenging styles of storytelling. He says it's those stories that are really changing the conversation and reshaping the community.
We've got great horror comics, thrillers, crime comics, straight up dramas. Superheroes have always had a following and will always have a following. It's the other types of books that people might not think about when they think of comics, these other genres I talked about. And people are seeking those out more and more than ever.
And once you get into the culture, it's a short path with many branches to get even more involved.
When I was 7, in 1992, Archie Comics started publishing a comic based on the video game character Sonic the Hedgehog. And I bought the first issue of that and went, this is awesome, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
From that moment forward, Elaine Will has worked in Saskatoon at turning her love of comics into a career. She started by drawing her own Sonic comics at that young age, then at 17 moved into writing and self-publishing her own work. She's been doing that for 10 years and is about to release a new graphic novel.
That's about a teen boy's struggle with manic depression. And I started doing that because mental illness is a topic that isn't explored very often in comics at all.
I actually was a bus driver in the city of Saskatoon for about 2.5 years while I pursued my writing on the side.
Curtis Wiebe has written a hit in Peter Panzerfaust. It's the story of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys in World War II France, fighting as part of the French resistance against a Nazi Captain Hook. It's proved so popular that the BBC is turning it into a motion comic series. Wiebe now lives in Vancouver, but makes no secret of where he got his start.
I'm definitely a small town Saskatchewan boy. This is all very, I guess, surreal a lot of the time, where it's just I never really expected my career to go this way, but I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess.
Curtis and Delane are just two of hundreds, maybe even thousands of Saskatchewan writers and artists creating new characters and writing new stories.
I think there's this misconception that a creative career is something that you only really do on the side or get a real job first. But if you are a passionate artist or writer, I really encourage you to pursue it with everything you've got.
Draw your friends, draw trees, draw houses, draw your shoes, and just like draw everything around you.
And while not everyone will find success in the industry, writing and sharing stories, reading what others have done, it's all become an integral part of the experience of Saskatchewan's comic culture.
Those that are creating comics are doing it very well and are able to do it because of technology and because of the supportive nature of the comics community at large.
Next on the 200th episode of Focus, Mario's motivation, the iconic video game character that spurred Saskatchewan creativity.
You're watching Focus Saskatchewan.
Welcome back. 2 years ago, we met with a number of Saskatchewan video game enthusiasts and developers, people whose inspiration came from the unassuming Italian plumber of their childhood. Our next story is from Raquel Fletcher, who explains how Mario changed video games forever.
It was the first game I ever played, and it was something that I remember playing with my father.
One of the castles in it is a maze, and I could never figure that out as a kid.
Super Mario was a really big deal when it came out because Mario did help you learn the game style in a different way.
Right here's the first game I've ever had, and it came bundled with the Nintendo.
Chris Corbin has almost every Mario Brothers game ever made.
I am a Nintendo enthusiast. I've been collecting since I've been 11. Well, you can never have too many, right? I probably shouldn't know the number. It's more like I don't want to know the number because, I don't know, that's not the point. I'd say it's well over 1,000, but to what? I don't know.
It takes a while for Corbin to open up about the origin of his collection.
Just don't want the waterworks to come out. Because I had a cousin who died, and that's what he did. I had a cousin who was 4 years older than me, and he used to collect video games. And I used to always envy his collection. And when I was 11, he passed away. And from then on, I kind of just started collecting on my own. My uncle happened to have kept the box all these years. And
Corbin looks at his first Super Mario game with nostalgia.
everything about that game was perfect. From the controls, the timing, the graphics. It was ahead of its time back then.
Michael Vance is also a bit of a video game collector and an amateur game designer. And he also has fond childhood memories of a particular video game.
I remember playing with my brother, so I would just keep running and running and running, and I would just never get anywhere. My brother would laugh at me and laugh at me.
Super Mario did a lot of really clever things with the way that the game was designed, the way that the sounds were stored, the way that the sprites were stored. And it was also very interesting in the way that it taught the player how to play.
Japanese company Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. In North America in 1985. It follows an Italian plumber in his quest to save Princess Peach.
Mario's storytelling was very simplistic, but there was a story involved, as opposed to Tetris, where you're just filling in blocks.
Mario's innovations and narrative have stuck in the minds of current game designers in Saskatchewan.
A lot of the games that are being developed these days, especially in Saskatchewan, are these simple mechanics, simple storytelling, but compelling gameplay.
You're a little monster who's trying to go around and eat security guards, but if they shine their flashlight on you, well, because you belong in the dark, and they hit you with light, you die. So you're trying to shut down the power to all the city so that you can gobble everybody up. It's really, really cool to make something and have somebody else play it.
Fear in the Dark is Vance's latest game creation. He designed and scored it as part of a 48-hour online game jam.
I've been playing games since I was like 4, so I don't know, it's always been a dream of mine.
Vance has a full-time job in IT, but he's confident he can see some success one day in the growing game design industry. According to statistics compiled in 2014 by the Entertainment Software Association of Canada, 54% of Canadians have played video games in the last 4 weeks. The Canadian gaming industry employs over 16,000 people and contributes $2.3 billion annually to the country's GDP.
Video games have become a medium, I think, in a lot of ways because it's interactive. Most universities and trade schools now have video game development as part of their program because it's so popular.
Saskatoon's Noodle Cake has developed over 80 games. Super Stickman Golf is one of its most popular and readily available on the App Store.
And so I really hope that when people see stuff like that, they kind of break free from that whole mentality of, oh, that happens to somebody else, and they kind of push through and do it themselves.
My favorite piece of this collection? I'd say this one.
And make a game that lasts through the generations.
Each system speaks a different story. That's why I can't sell anything that I grew up playing with, because, I don't know, there's sentimental value, and to a point I hope to, have my kids enjoy the same things I did.
Next on the 200th episode of Focus, we look back at a small-town Saskatchewan legend of giant proportions.
You're watching Focus Saskatchewan.
Welcome back. Over 6 seasons, we've covered a lot of ground in the province. Most small towns have a local museum to share the stories of their communities. Now, at the museum in Willow Bunch, we share the story of a man who was truly larger than life. It was our very first Focus feature to win an award, taking home the National RTDNA Award for Short Feature. Here's Tom Vernon with the Willow Bunch Giant.
In the hills of southwestern Saskatchewan, you'll find Willow Bunch. It's one of the oldest settlements in the province, and the sign welcoming you to the community lets you know that this small town has a giant story to tell.
He was famous, and he was born and raised here, so it's part of our history.
It's been a record year at the Willow Bunch Museum. Visitors from all over coming to learn the story of Edward Beaupre, most not believing their own eyes.
Was he really that tall? Yes, he was.
He always loved people, like he was a really friendly person, but he would like pick people up and put them on roofs if they bothered him.
Edward Beaupre was born January 9th, 1881. The oldest of 15 children, he would show no sign of his size to come until he was 3 years old. Then he started to grow at an alarming rate. By 9, he was 6 feet tall. At 12, 6'6", and at 17, he was 7'1". Like most young men at the time, his dream was to help his family build a successful ranch. But the bigger he grew, the further out of reach that dream would get.
Story is he wanted to be a cowboy, and couldn't find a horse that was big enough for him, because by the time he was 15, he was over 7 feet.
The family still needed his help to make money, so when he was 21, Edward joined the circus, touring around eastern Canada and the United States. By then, he was nearly 8 feet tall and 365 pounds. His hands were more than a foot in length. He wore size 22 shoes, and he was still growing. Crowds would gather to see his amazing feats of strength. He could lift up to 900 pounds, and at least once lifted an 800-pound horse. But the touring and his growth would take its toll. His feats would leave him feeling weary, and each night he'd lie awake with a persistent cough. His last show would be the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. By now, he stood 8 feet 3 inches. After a performance, he had a cup of tea and felt a sharp pain in his chest and started coughing up blood. On his way to see the doctor, he would confide to a friend, "It's so sad to die so young and so far away from dear parents." Edouard died less than 2 hours later. An autopsy would find it was a tumor on his pituitary gland that caused his incredible growth. He died from a lung hemorrhage and complications from tuberculosis. He was just 23 years old, and it would take 86 years to bring him home.
When he died, the parents tried to go down east. They got as far as Winnipeg, the story is, and didn't have enough money to bring him back because it was costly. It was such a big body. They were in contact with an agent who said, well, don't worry, I'll have him buried, but he didn't.
Edouard's body would be preserved and put up for display in St. Louis before being shut down a number of times, and then again in Montreal, where his body would be misplaced and found in a warehouse by some children. The University of Montreal would take ownership of his corpse.
They had it exposed in a glass case. He had been mummified, so it wasn't a pretty sight. So there was a few complaints when people saw it, so they put a loincloth on him.
His family had no idea, having assumed his body had been buried as promised in 1904. It wasn't until 1970 that they finally learned where he was. That began a long quest to bring Edouard home. For years, the university resisted, fearing the body could be dug up and displayed again. But in September 1989, the university agreed Edouard should be brought home. His body was cremated, and on July 7, 1990, 86 years and 3 days after he died, Edouard's remains were blessed and received a proper burial in front of the museum.
I think that was one of the happiest days for my grandpa because he did fight for about 10 years to get him home.
It was very emotional for the family because, you know, they always thought he had been buried and it was such a shock, and they had to work so hard to be able to get the body home and give him a decent burial.
The whole town came to watch, and it was blessed and everything, and it was just a really good day.
Today, the legend of the Willabunch giant lives on in the museum. His story is there for all to see, but Edouard is finally away from prying eyes.
I always come in this room every once in a while and just kind of imagine how it must have been for him to be so tall and to have to give up your dreams all the time.
The story ended well, let's say. It was a very sad story, but it ended well. Yeah, he's resting in peace.
There you have it, our 200th episode. We look forward to telling many more of your stories in the years to come. We're back next episode with brand new stories, but until then, be sure to check out our website for more content. I'm Blake Law. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk again soon.